For the Ethics in Action project, we have chosen to do option 1. We would like to examine the ethical violations of the MKUltra project. The project was undertaken by the CIA Behavioral Control Program during the Cold War. After World War II, tensions between the emerging superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, were at an all-time high. The threat of nuclear war and consequently the end of human existence as we knew it was lingering like a dark cloud over everyone. Neither side wanted to budge or fall behind the other for fear of losing power completely. At the beginning of World War II, we were still using mediocre biplanes, which were practically built out of toothpicks. By the end, we had fighter jets and other cutting-edge technologies. China, the Soviet Union, Germany, and the USA, via the mission codenamed Operation Paperclip, all began developing weapons aimed at controlling the human mind, actual mind control. The United States was terrified at the thought of communist countries researching and successfully developing mind control methods. To a government that wanted to protect its citizens, the idea of brainwashing was the worst thing imaginable. The solution was to beat the other side to the finish line, and that's exactly what the United States government attempted to do. The birth of the CIA. The CIA was created in September 1947, just a little over 2 years after the end of World War II, with the goal of gathering intelligence from both domestic and foreign entities. A 1951 CIA memo stated the need to explore specific methods for controlling the minds of individuals is among the concerns of a Cold War world run by a new Soviet mind control and brainwashing technology. This was a genuine fear in the United States. In an early 1950 CIA document, it was noted that hypnotism appears to have been used in some cases by the Soviets, with the possibility of lowering resistance against telling the truth, while also being able to induce specific actions or behaviors in a subject. It is possible for a skilled operator to bring about an interrogation, yet leave the subject with no specific recollection of having been interrogated. The implications of mind control. The leverage a government could gain with this kind of power over other humans, whether they were spies, prisoners of war, or even ordinary citizens, was almost unrivaled in the context of warfare. Deception in experimental psychology brings to mind the Milgram experiment, where people were misled into thinking they were administering electric shocks to another person to see how far they would go, just because an authority figure told them to do so. As Herrera, 2001, notes, critics remain unconvinced by this appeal to research needs, and by claims about deception being innocuous. The Milgram studies have been criticized because subjects could be harmed by learning unpleasant things about themselves in an experiment that involved deception. It raises big questions about how far we'll go under pressure and how much we're willing to trust those in charge, whether it's your boss, your parents, or even the government.
The unveiling of MKUltra. The United States succeeded in the unethical experimentation of human psychology in the mid to late 1970s when over 20,000 CIA documents were released, revealing the country's most illegal and unethical experiments done on humans, conducted to explore the limits of the human brain, ultimately. MKUltra is the most shocking example of how a single government agency planned and attempted to control and alter the minds of its own people. MKUltra is how the United States government attempted to develop psychological, biological, and radiological weapons to turn both foreign and domestic spies into mind-controlled sleeper agents. And this might still be happening today. MKUltra wasn't just one single project or experiment, it was a web of experiments that were all interconnected, and they all had the same ultimate goal of human mind control. The other experimental projects that were happening were called Project Bluebird, Artichoke, MK Search, and MK Naomi, and so many more. But MKUltra was officially launched in 1953 under CIA Director Allen Dulles, and it was one of the largest experimental psychology projects ever known, with over 150 sub-projects created and handled by more than 80 different institutions, universities, prisons and pharmaceutical companies, and they all didn't have any idea what they were doing, and they had no idea that this was all work directly for the CIA. And with all of this happening, more creative and even more so illegal experiments started taking place. The story of MKUltra serves as a powerful reminder of the ethical boundaries that must be upheld in the field of psychology. The experiments conducted under MKUltra blatantly disregarded the principles of informed consent, respect for people, and the right to autonomy, core tenets of ethical practices in psychology. Ethics in psychology isn't just about following the rules. It's about protecting the dignity, rights, and well-being of all individuals. The MKUltra project highlights the dangers of allowing fear and ambition to override ethical considerations, leading to practices that would cause irreversible harm to individuals and society. And studying these historical events in the scope of experimental psychology really does help us understand the critical importance of ethical guidelines, like in the APA's Code of Conduct. And teachings like this reinforce the need for rigorous ethical oversight in psychological research to make sure that the pursuit of this knowledge never comes at the cost of someone else, or any animal, or any human. By reflecting on the ethical violations of MKUltra, we can better appreciate the necessity of having ethical vigilance in our work as future psychologists. We can't let things like this happen again. And it's our responsibility to ensure that this never happens again, and dark chapters in history like this never open back up. And the darkest stories like this truly guide our commitment to positive ethical integrity in all our professional endeavors.
Principle A, beneficence and non-maleficence. First up, we've got the principle of beneficence and non-maleficence. This principle is all about doing good and avoiding harm. But in Project MKUltra, they did the opposite. Instead, it left its subjects so traumatized that some even attempted to or tragically succeeded in taking their own lives. The experiments were inhumane, causing suffering that no one should ever endure. Principle D, justice. Next, we have justice. Now, in a fair world, this principle would ensure that everyone is treated with equality and fairness. MKUltra threw that out the window. The selection of subjects was anything but just or fair. People were chosen based on convenience or vulnerability, not consent. Principle E, respect for people's rights and dignity. Then there's respect for people's rights and dignity. The idea here is that everyone has fundamental rights that should be honored, but MKUltra showed zero respect for those rights. They treated people like lab rats, completely ignoring their autonomy. And moving on to standard violations, we start with Standard 3.02, Prohibition of Sexual Harassment. As if things couldn't get worse, some subjects were subjected to sexual abuse, a direct violation of Standard 3.02, the Prohibition of Sexual Harassment. This wasn't just a breach of ethics, it was a monstrous act. Standard 3.03, Prohibition of Other Forms of Harassment. The harassment didn't stop there. Standard 3.03 prohibits any form of harassment, yet the subjects faced a variety of abuse that went beyond the imaginable. The ethical violations just kept piling up. Standard 3.04, Prohibition of Mental or Physical Torture. Now, let's get into Standard 3.04, which prohibits any kind of torture. But MKUltra practically turned torture into a methodology. The experiments were not just unethical, they were outright cruel, involving severe mental and physical torment and anguish. Standard 3.10, Requirement of Informed Consent. Finally, we get to one of the most glaring violations, Standard 3.10, Requirement of Informed Consent. In MK Ultra, informed consent was a joke. Many subjects didn't even know what was being done to them, and some were blatantly misled. Vulnerable people, including homeless children, were exploited, their inability to give informed consent completely disregarded. In summary, Project MK Ultra wasn't just a little ethically shady, it was an ethical catastrophe, which violated many human and civil rights.